Okay, last Q&A of the year. Yeah.
So it's about Avos 2:7.
Avos 2:7.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to Avos. Yeah. Avos.
Local Mark Piscor Machim.
2, 2, 5 on this numbering. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Right. So let's should I read it first? Yeah. So who haya Omer? Who's the who?
Hillel.
Okay. I'll take your word for that, although I will also check your word for that. Reuven Gamliel is 2. So it looks like Reuven Gamliel.
Oh,
right. Let's just double check the Kaufman manuscript. Where is it? Who haya Omer? Oh yeah, so this is Hillel according to the Kaufman manuscript. Oh yeah, Hillel gets inserted right there. Okay. That's strange. It's also out of chronological order, right? So it must be paired by topic.
Yeah, this paragraph is weird.
Well, I mean, this paragraph right. Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, I found that Pirkei Avos goes in chronological order until it deviates for topic reasons, and then until it stops caring altogether, which I think is a thing, but I'm not sure. Yeah, but anyway, so sorry. So let's read it. I lost it already. Hillel Omer. Nope. Wait.
It's next.
Oh, it's next one. Oh yeah. Okay, so Hu haya Omer ein bori rechet v'lo am haaretz chasid v'lo bashan lamed v'lo kaptan melamed v'lo kol amar b'skora machkim. So Hillel would say, a boor cannot fear sin, and the translation of boor is boor. Am haaretz cannot be a chasid. A baishan, someone who's ashamed, doesn't learn. V'lo kaptan melamed, someone who's impatient can't teach, and not all who are excessive in merchandising, no, in trade, become wise. And the Kaufman manuscript says, "Velo kol hamar b'skor machim." Okay, so it's the same. Yeah. And u'v'makom she'ein anashim hishtadlu lios ish. And in a place where there are no men, strive to be a man.
Yes. So, I'd say it's all well and good, according to like for someone like the Rambam, where he describes having like the Rambam's theoretical person, where he spends 3 hours working, and 9 hours learning,
right?
But with the fact that nowadays jobs require a lot more time than that, are we just not able to be machim, or
yeah. Well, first of all, I question 2 terms. One is schora, and the other is marbeh, right? Yeah. Because schora, I mean, if you look at the way that schora sometimes, can you just pass that? The elegance or whatever they are, the softs doesn't work. Yeah. I grew up calling everything Kleenex. I don't know if that's a West Coast thing or a my house thing, but yeah. But yeah, that's the right way. Schora can sometimes just be the stand-in for like how people worked. But I also feel like schora, the outer limits of schora were like, going on sea voyages and like going to other countries and like being, like you look at the way that the Rambam talks negatively about schora when he does, and he always gives those extreme examples, So that's one question about what the schora is. We're just doing this local hamarbeh b'schora machkim, and the question is, how do we think about that nowadays? And then marbeh to me means excess. Means a lot, but the implication is excess. Like in kol hamarbeh sicha im ha'isha, et cetera. Like that's not talking with women. That's being excessive. So those are the first 2 things that come to mind. And then the other thing is I'm confused about this low kol, right? What's the implication of that? Right, because a lot of the other things in Pirkei Avos are stated in absolute manners, in absolute ways. For example, ein bori rechet, in lo amar archaeology. So what's the implication, especially in that memra, of not everyone who does it? Like the implication you get is like, a baishan can't learn, a kaplan can't teach. And if you try to be marbid b'skora and be machkim, the odds are against you, but it is possible. It's just not likely, you know. So like these are the reservations I have in terms of this. So like, and I'm only saying this because you're asking the question from here, as opposed to from the Rambam. You know, if you're asking from the Rambam about like, you know, like how does the Rambam have such a thing? The guy has like 9 hours to learn every day. You know, for that I would say simply that yeah, it was a lot easier to make a living back then because you know, I think the standards were different in turn, you know, or like at least for the average person, you know, standards are so different now, and especially in where we are, and so I think like there's just a you know, a what do you call it? You need more money to have the regular levels of comfort, and people are not gonna, you know, you couldn't have the psychological security, forget even the practical security, the psychological security of like you know, the Chofetz Chaim example of like, yeah, you open your shop until you make enough money for the day and you close it. You know, like that's just not how the world works now. So as for your question about machkim, that's another question also. It's just weird. Machkim, you know, is that davka chokhmah? You know, it's also just a weird, you don't usually see that word, you know, like getting the Kesser Shel Torah. Like, okay, great, I get that. You know, machkim, like, is that skill? Is that accumulation of knowledge? So it's hard for me to answer Pirkei without learning it. But without learning it, I would say that that you know that yeah, you have you know, you have less you know, yeah, we don't have as much time and it's harder to do this. Yeah, you know, I mean, you see the approach that some people in our yeshiva take of, you know, remain committed to learning and work and retire early, you know. But so you see people can do it, but like that's just not common. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, next. Yeah.
When you use the term ego, what exactly do you mean by that?
What do I mean by that? What I usually mean by ego is not the strict Freudian definition of ego. I usually just mean your sense of self or self-conception. And so big ego or inflated ego means like it is not realistic.
I mean, you think you're greater?
You think you're greater than you actually are. Yeah. So that's, I think, just running the numbers. I think I usually use it. Yeah. I mean, I think it differs in different cases, you know.
What do you think is the strict, like the way Freud uses it?
Well, Freud uses it in the scheme of superego, ego, and id, right? And if I remember correctly, then the super, you know, id is your animalistic pleasure pain you know, drives, and you know, what we would call the animalistic part of you, and the superego is the part that holds that back, and then the ego is what moderates between the two. But I don't remember the nuanced definition of Freud's ego. I'll look it up just to see what it says. Freudian definition of ego. So Wikipedia says, yeah, the ego acts according to the reality principle. Since the id's drives are frequently incompatible with social reality, the ego attempts to direct its energy and satisfy its demands in accordance with the imperatives of that reality. According to Freud, the ego, as in its role as mediator between the id and reality, is often, quote, obligated to cloak the unconscious commands of the id with its own preconscious rationalizations, to conceal the id's conflicts with reality, to profess to be taking notice of reality even when the id has remained rigid and unyielding. I think this is one of the things that bothered me when I was more holding in Freud, which is that that, you know, we say that the reality principle is really stemming from the Tzelem Elohim. I don't know what Freud's view of the intellect is, like where.
I don't think it's really there for him.
I don't think so either. I think he holds like it's all psyche, and like there's just, it's just
Right.
all is an outgrowth of like your, you know, your infantile psychology.
Right.
So,
but I think if I understand correctly, I think he thinks that the ego, like if the id just satisfied all its desires immediately, it would turn out bad for it. So like the ego tries to help the id
right,
satisfy.
to moderate it in that
But I
sense,
guess the
right?
intellect could like do more than that and decide not to satisfy it.
Right. Also, I don't know what Freud holds about what determines your values. I mean, I don't even know what Freud's concept of values is. Like, is it just pleasure, pain, and you can't get out of that ever? Because we hold that you can get out of that,
Right.
you know, in terms of like lishma or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. I don't know. It's been a while since I've looked into that. Yeah. Oh, I gotta remember to be responsible. Ego, Freudian ego. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
In this week's parsha, what's the deal with the waving clothes of healing? Yeah. Like, specifically, it
Yeah.
seems like it kind of seems like Leviim are like some sort of korban.
Yeah.
Like they stand them in front of everyone. They do smicha on them, and the smicha
Right.
like what's going on with that?
Right. So if I had to guess, now I don't have a universal theory about where about tenufa. Like I haven't looked through all the cases. But borrowing from lulav, right? It's molichu maybe lemisha ha'arba rucha shelo malu mori lemisha ha'shemayim va'aretz shelo, right? That you do in and out for the one to whom the four directions belong, and up and down to the one to whom the Shemayim and Arts belong. So it's an acknowledgement of Lashem Haaretz Umloah, that everything belongs to God, or Konei Shemayim Va'aretz. So my guess, total guess without learning, because this is a Q&A, without learning through the sources, is that with the Leviim, they have to be dedicated to Hashem. So part of their inauguration is going to be doing a demonstration of that they are wholly dedicated to WHOLLY, dedicated to Hashem. But I haven't done a full survey, and like I can't answer why. Like, yeah, I know Tenufa is involved in Korbanos in general, but I don't know which aspects are. Like, you could ask me a question, well, why don't you do Tenufa to like the Kalim when you inaugurate them? Like, I don't know, so that's what I would assume it comes from. Yeah.
Well, it seems like there's some sort of analogy to them being korbanos or something. When that's what it seemed like when I was learning it last night. Like all the nations like does like smicha on them, and then there's the smicha, and then
that's interesting.
Yeah, and then they do smicha on par, parim, and then they do the parim.
Right. I have to confess that when I do a mental ranking of the topics in Behaalosecha, the many topics, that usually is very low, so I haven't really gotten there yet in terms of like really investigating that.
Yeah, so this is my with Ezra,
obscure parts of topics. Yeah.
Yeah. That we always like gloss over.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's good. It's a good endeavor. Yeah. It's a good question. Yeah, let me know what you find. Yes.
So what value is there in someone who does the mitzvahs just because God commanded them, and not necessarily because like they see the truth in them, just because?
Yeah, sure. Hold on a second. I just had a funny slip. I was going to say waving to the Nevi'im. I don't know where that came from. Yeah. What's the value in someone who does the mitzvahs just because God commanded it? Right. So that's a good question. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, so I think that there's going to be a different benefit depending on whether you're talking about chukim, mishpatim, or eidos. Okay, so just to quickly review, chukim are the mitzvos that the reasons are not obvious. Mishpatim are the mitzvos that the reasons are obvious. And then eidos are let me state it with the three definitions. Mishpatim are the mitzvos that the reasons are obvious, and we would have done them without the Torah. Chukim are the reasons are not obvious, and we would not do them without the Torah. Eidos, the reasons are obvious because they're commemorative mitzvos, but we wouldn't have done them without the Torah, right? Like Shabbos and Sukkah and Kiddush and all the mitzvos of Pesach. So with Mishpatim, there are going to be societal benefits for doing them just because God said so, because many of the Mishpatim are for regulating, tzedek and mishpat and chesed in society, and there's going to be automatic benefits on your midos for many of them as well. So if you give tzedakah, for example, you are actually helping the poor. It doesn't matter why you're doing it. And you're also conditioning yourself to have a certain relationship with money, even though you're not really thinking about the values, right? Or let's say you force yourself to help your enemy, with his animal and his burden or whatever, right? So you are promoting shalom in society, and you are overcoming your Yetzer Hara, right? So even if you don't know why you're doing it, all right? So that's, I think, makan, you're preventing people from falling and getting injured on your property. So that's like a certain mita for you in the sense of it's gonna sensitize you to the fact that I can't just do whatever I want without harming people, and it's also going to be good for society. So mishpatim, by and large, there are going to be many automatic benefits that accrue to you and to society. Okay, eidos, if you don't know why you're sitting in a sukkah, then you are totally missing out on the purpose. But again, the benefit of eidos is that the reasons are usually going to be like stamped onto the surface of the mitzvah. So like it's very hard to, I don't know, to say kiddush without, like, I guess if you don't understand the words of kiddush, then but most people understand masturbation, so like, so you're going to get a minimal benefit from the eidos as well. And you're also going to, the other purpose of the eidos, which I've written a material on, is to keep the national memories of those events alive in society, to testify to the historicity and to the reality of those events. So you are going to be doing that also. Chukim is going to be one where, I guess we can't say this across the board because we don't know what the reasons are for all the chukim, but there are many chukim where you're not going to get any benefit if you don't know. You're not going to get any particular benefit if you don't know what the reason is, and you're doing it just because God says so. So, for example, shatnez, right? So, like, other than the general benefit of like, I'm subordinating my mind to God, or I'm subordinating my will to God, and like reinforcing all of those ideas and that like mentality of like being an eved serving his master, or doing the will of the king, which are generic benefits, like you're not really going to be getting the benefit from shatnez per se, but again, like it depends on what your theory of shatnez is. So for example, if your theory of shatnez is like the Rambam of it's removing a certain practice of avodah zarah from society, well, you are doing that, by keeping it even mindlessly. But like other mitzvos, like where, the benefit is, or kashrus, let's say, right? So kashrus, if the mitzvah is, if the reason is health, like many Rishonim hold, so then that's going to happen no matter what. If it's self-control, that's going to happen no matter what. If it's symbolism, like some of the Farshim hold, then like you're not going to get anything without the symbols, except maybe priming yourself to be able to like access them later on, like making it part of the fabric of your psyche. So yeah. Related to the question is, I mean, I don't want to review this whole article now, but just to point you in the direction of it is the what's it called? Limits of lo lishma. All right, so that was one I explored the question of how low can you go? Like what is the lowest level of keeping something and it's still considered to be lo lishma? And the example that's given is the indolent women of Machoza. So Psachim 50a, or as a Mishnah 4:1, in a place where the people are accustomed to work on Erev Pesach until midday, one may do so. In a place where the people were not accustomed to work, one may not do so. And then the Gemara on 50b says, one who performs labor on Erev Shabbos or Erev Yom Tov, from Mincha and time and onwards, and on Motzi Shabbos, on Motzi Yom Tov, on Motzi Yom Kippurim, such person will never see a sign of bracha from the work. Okay, and then it says, the sages taught in a Tosefta, there is one who is diligent and rewarded, there's one who is diligent and suffers a loss, there's one who is indolent and rewarded, and there's one who's indolent and suffers a loss. How so? Diligent and rewarded is one who works the entire week and does not work on Erev Shabbos. Diligent and suffers a loss is one who works all week and works on Erev Shabbos. Indolent but rewarded is one who does not work the entire week and does not work on Erev Shabbos. Indolent and suffers a loss is one who does not work the entire week and works on Erev Shabbos. Rava said, with regard to these women of Machoza, in my mind, I call them the women of mimosas because I just picture them sitting and just not doing any work ever and just drinking mimosas all day. Even though they do not work on Erev Shabbos, it is due to excessive pampering. That's where the mimosas come in, because they don't work on any other day. Even so, we call them indolent but rewarded. So I came up with an argument here, I don't remember what it was, that like there is a minimal benefit of these. So these are women who never work. So when they have their mimosas on Erev Shabbos, it's no different than Wednesday mimosas, but the Gemara is saying that they get rewarded, right? So the question is like, how do they get rewarded? And that seems to be a very low level of lo lishma. And so there would be some benefit. And so that's even lower than what you're saying, because that's not even doing it because God commanded it. That's just like you happen to be behaviorally in line with like some halacha, So I think this is relevant to the sugya, but I don't want to go into this whole particular sugya.
I was thinking about this because I don't know if my teacher told me this or maybe I just got the impression from like elementary school level. Yeah. That would be like the best way to keep the mitzvahs. It's just because God commanded them.
Yeah, that's a model that some people advance, and it must have a source in terms of like there must be some philosophy of that where like I've quoted this many times, but the worst answer I've heard about what it means to learn Lishma, when I asked in like when I was first, I might have been before I converted to Judaism, that I got an answer that said you should like davka learn things that you dislike, so that because then you're just learning because of the mitzvah, and so like I don't know what kind of horrific model that's going to be for someone. Like if I start loving Torah, I should like stop. Yeah, like what is that? What does that eventuate in? But it comes from this idea of like I do think that there is a model that people have of like the ideal avodas Hashem is the mindless automaton. Like it might come from, again, I don't know Hasidus, but I know in when people talk about Hasidus, there is this idea of like bittul, like self-negation, and you can imagine that idea being paired with this like there's no aspect of myself in this at all. I'm not doing it for myself at all. I'm not enjoying it. I'm just doing it for God. My favorite model of this is like that I used to quote as like a way to say the opposite is let's see. That's for learning, yeah, but there's a good one in Tehillim 119. The nice thing about Tehillim 119 is you can remember where it is if you are quoting from the first half of the pasuk because it's an acrostic. But if I'm looking for the word ma'od, oh, okay, here we go. It's early on. Atat tzivisa pikudecha lishmor ma'od. You command your pikudim to keep exceedingly. Now, the Radak holds that all the terms in Tehillim 119 are interchangeable, but I do believe that, let's see if they have Meiri yet. No. So we got to look at the Meiri. Okay, again, only place you can get the Meiri on Tehillim is on MG Keter, the most awkward interface site. Let's go to, obviously, Ksuvim is above Parshios and Brachos by Graham. Yeah. Okay. Oops. Sorry. All right. Tehillim 119, and then Meiri. Okay. So I believe he says Pikudim. Let's see. Oh, and after I'm just gonna look at the phrase. Maybe I'm quoting the wrong pasuk even. Oh, you also can't do find on page easily. Look at that. Oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I quoted the wrong pasuk. Let me go back to all Torah so I can be comfortable again. Oh, did I already get out of all Torah? Okay, what pasuk is this? 8. Es chukacha eshmor. That's the one. Okay, your chukim I keep. Al tazveni ad ma'od. Okay, so he says es chukacha eshmor ad ma'od. That's not what the pasuk says. Am I quoting the wrong pasuk? It's no, it's very difficult because a lot of these pasukim have similar things. But this is the Meiri I wanted. He says tachlis hashmira, the highest level of shmira, ilu hasechel yechayvim, is it's as if the intellect obligates you to do it. So that's like the opposite of that model, which is saying that like that I would do them even if God didn't command them. And to me, that's what it means to obey a tzivui as a human. If you're obeying a tzivui as an animal, then like blind dog-like loyalty is the thing. But if you're doing it as a human, it's my divine, my Tel Elohim is obligating me to do this. Yeah.
So just to clarify, that would not be doing it because you enjoy it. It happens to be you're gonna
right. Exactly. It happens to be the enjoy. Right. It's because it's the rational thing to do. Right. Yeah.
Then wouldn't the other approach then wouldn't the benefit of that one be that like in theory it should have a greater longevity, whereas here if your seichel no longer smechayev you to do it, then
that's why it's ki'ilu.
Okay.
Because you are doing it because God commanded it, but I'm saying the when you're doing it, then like the mode that you're in is like this is a thing that is rational to do, and even if like I'd be hard pressed to find a case where it's irrational to do it. Meaning, let's say for example, like there are times when the system obligates you to do something and it's not good for you, but that doesn't mean it's irrational. Like it is irrational to keep the system even when it's not good for you. Yeah.
Is the current idea though of metzuveh gadol metzuveh, just meaning that there is an idea of submitting purely because.
Okay. Yeah. So I will go to that in 1 second. I just want to do two things. One is write down blind obedience, the other thing I want to do is I always forget what I post on Facebook and what I share in the chat. But one thing you should know about the reason why they call this MG Keter is because this is based on, this one is the most accurate text of Tanakh. Okay, because it's the Keter Aram Sova, which is the Aleppo Codex. And what I did not know is you can just go Tanakh, so Hatzig, Tanakh im, Tanakh ve'ozrim ve'nosafim, and then the one item here is Silum Keter, Ksav Yad Keter Aram Sova. So it will take you directly to a picture. Wait for it. Wait for it. Oh, there we go. A picture of the Aleppo Codex. So you can look at it yourself. And if you don't know what the Aleppo Codex is, then God help you. No, then you need to read about it. But yeah. Okay, anyway, so that's the thing. Okay, now Yitzi's question of gadol metzuveh v'oseh. There's a Tosfos, I think. Gadol. Yeah, it's in Kedushin. Kedushin. I think. Oh, look, I highlighted it. Okay, so Yitzi's asking, in case the recording didn't pick it up, is what about the concept of gadol metzuveh v'oseh mimish ena metzuveh v'oseh, which makes it sound like the obedience factor, right, is like going to net you more reward than if you just did it based on your seichel, for example, right? Was that your question? Okay, yeah. So Toto says, near dahainu taima demisha metzuveh v'oseh adif. The reason why the metzuveh v'oseh is better is lafisha doeg umitztaer yoser pen yavor, because he is worried and pained more lest he transgress mimish ein metzuveh than someone who is not commanded sheyesh lo pas basalo, because he's got bread in his basket, which is Chazal's idiom for im yirtza yaniach. If you want, you could just stop doing it. Okay. And there's a bunch of Tosfos like this, I think, right? There's and they say it in slightly different ways. Let me just go back to the search. Oh, it's here. Thanks. Let me just look directly in the Taisvism. Oh, maybe there's not a bunch. Yeah, gadol hametzuveh v'oseh appears mipnei shehu doeg tamid levatel yitzro. That's the better one for our purposes. Ulakai mitzvahs boro, because he is worried constantly in order to be mevatel his yetzer and to fulfill the commandment of his creator. So in terms of a reward for mitzvos, so there's a misconception that people read this and they think that stam, you're going to get more reward if you're obligated in a mitzvah and you do it than if you weren't commanded, okay? Because that's what it sounds like it's saying, right? So, for example, and this came up a lot when I taught at an all-girls school, because women are told that like they don't have a chiyuv in Talmud Torah, so when they learn, it's worth less than when a man learns, okay? My understanding is that's completely not what it means, okay? Is that what it really means is that there is a separate schar that you can only get if you are commanded, which you can't get if you're not, okay? The ikar schar of a mitzvah is the perfection you get from the mitzvah, okay? So when a woman says Kriya Shema and a man says Kriya Shema, or, even though women are obligated in Kriya Shema, then women and men get the exact same reward from the Kabbalah's Umul Shemayim, okay? Or when they learn Torah, or when they do anything else that, they hear shofar, right? What women can't get is the reward for overcoming the yetzer that can only be awakened by being forced to do something. There are certain, and it's not just one thing, there are certain psychological dynamics that come from being commanded to do something. So there's a natural like rebellious tendency, like I don't want to do it. There are feelings where like it's inescapable. That's like the Pat Masala thing. There are a couple more Mepharshim who give these other benefits. There's certain benefits that you can't get if you're doing it voluntarily. And even if you take a neder, right, where you make it obligatory, then that's also not going to cut it, because in the back of your mind, it was originated from you, or you could do Hataras Nadarim if need be. The only weird example is converting to Judaism. We're converting to Judaism. Yeah, it still is stemming from you, but once you opt into the system, then it becomes obligatory. So like that's just an interesting case is, are the mitzvos of a ger metzuveh v'oser and metzuveh v'oser in terms of this? Like that's I think that's a nuanced question. So my answer to you is that that I think my understanding of gadol metzuveh v'oser means it's like a very localized type of schar that you can only get if you're doing it because you're commanded. But the ikar schar that we've been talking about in Michael's question about like the perfection from the mitzvos is equal regardless of whether you're commanded or not. Does that make sense? Yeah, Isaac.
I was gonna say, Gare, one thing this guy here doesn't have pasta solo.
Right, that's the interesting thing about it, right?
Yeah,
Right.
for Pesach.
Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, I do want to stick on this question.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
No, I don't know. No, I'm saying sorry. No, if you have a question on this, then fine. But if not, we can do another one. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Especially like we see here like self-help books, like all the rage, like pop that everywhere.
Yeah.
Atomic Habits, whatever it might be. I was curious, from either Tanakh, Torah Sheba'al Peh, or even your own perspective, like what have you seen, or do you think is the best way to build the consistency from a Torah perspective?
All right, hold on a second. Self-help. Funny you should mention Atomic Habits because I mean I don't know if you know how big I am on Atomic Habits.
I've seen you post.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So from I mean, I do think that well, let me just give my quick spiel. Atomic Habits and Tiny Habits.
Can you clarify the question, Mark?
The question is, what's the best way to build habits for self development, yeah, either from Torah perspective or in general. So like, so again, Atomic Habits and Tiny Habits are two really good books. And I go back and forth between about which one that I like better. Atomic Habits is more practical in the sense of like giving you a suite of techniques. Tiny Habits is better as it's more researched and it's also a integrated system. Atomic Habits is also easier to read in the sense of like it's very readable, but Tiny Habits is like you feel like you're reading a nonfiction book, like with chapters and arguments, whereas Atomic Habits feels like just like like techniques. So both those are very good. I have given shiurim before on showing the corollaries between the Rambam's Hilchos Tshuva and Atomic Habits. It's not like a one-to-one ratio or anything, but many of the techniques that James Clear outlines there are reflected in Hilchos Tshuva. And so like there is overlap. In my mind, like, and I'm sure you're gonna find Chazals also that talk about like that talk about habits, like for I mean, take something like going with bad habits, like once you do an avera twice, then it's mutter to you, right? Like, and is it really mutter? No, it's kilu, it's mutter to you. It's like if you analyze that memra, that'll give you insight into like how bad habits start forming, or this was on Kufiyud tests. Because you can remember that this is on Shabbos Kufiyud test, because every Gemara you ever want in Shabbos is somehow on Kufiyud. There's certain sectors where like in my mind, like I feel like anytime I look up the memra I want, it's always on the same daf. It's gonna be really embarrassing if this is not on Kufiyud test. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay. Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Amar Mar Ukva. Sorry, Amar Mar Ukva. Kol hamispal be'erev Shabbos. No, that's not the one. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda Omer Shnei Malachei Sharis Malavin Lo Adam be'erev Shabbos Mi Beis HaKnesses LeBeiso Echad Tov Echad Ra. So two ministering angels escort a person home on erev Shabbos from shul to his house. One good and one bad. Ukshaba LeBeiso, and when he comes home, Umotze Ner Dalek V'Shulchan Aruch Umitam Mutzaas, and he finds his candle lit, his table set, and his bed made. The Malach Tov Omer Yihi Ratzon Shetei LaShabbos Acheres Kach Umalach Ra One Amen Bal Korcho. Then the good Malach says, may it be God's will that the next Shabbos will be like this, and the bad Malach says Amen against his will. V'im Lav, and if not, if he doesn't find his table set and his bed made and his candle lit, then Malach Ra Omer, then the bad Malach says Yihi Ratzon Shetei LaShabbos Acheres Kach. That may be your will that Shabbos is the next Shabbos is like this. And the good malach is forced to say amen, right? So Aharon ben Rambam and the Rambam say that what are these things? This is the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, and that this is really about habit formation, and that and you could frame this however you want. You could say that like the good habits and bad habits like amplify. You could see an idea here about like it's going to change the way you relate to Shabbos. That like there's another James Clear thing of like I forgot what he calls it, but like staging the area so that like it makes it easier for you to get into the right mentality if you set things up ahead of time, and whereas the person can say like, oh, I can set it up on the spot, but like, no, it changes the way that you relate to it. So like you could get a lot of the stuff from members of Chazal. I think the best way to do it is through self-help books because they're making these things explicit and practicable. So you're going to it's going to be more accessible and usable. And then picking up on it from Chazal, from Mishlei, there's a lot of Mishlei Psukim that talk about habits also. But like, if someone said like, I need good habits right now, I would just hand them the copy of Atomic Habits that I have staged and waiting to give to someone who wants it. Yeah. And that's not a joke. So if anyone wants a copy of Atomic Habits, I have one. Yeah. And if anyone wants a copy of 4,000 Weeks, I have 40. So yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Next. Yeah.
Do you have any? I think I might have asked this like last year or something, but maybe
it's good to ask different the same question different times.
Do you have any advice on teaching in general?
No, just kidding. Any advice on teaching in general? If I had to boil it down, I would use Adler. So I think this is on here. Yeah, okay. So the best essay on teaching ever, in my opinion, that I've read is Adler's on teaching and learning. Teaching and learning. I'm just going to read the bold spoiler alert. Okay. All learning is either by instruction or by discovery, that is with or without the aid of teachers. That the effort to communicate what a man knows is not in itself effective teaching follows from the fact that such efforts are seldom ever successful, and at best they succeed only in part. Since whatever can be learned by instruction must necessarily have been learned first by discovery, without the aid of teachers, it follows that teachers are, absolutely speaking, dispensable. All learning is a process of discovery on the part of the learner. And there are two types of learning, of active learning: unaided discovery without the aid of teachers on the one hand, and aided discovery, or discovery deliberately assisted by teachers on the other. To suppose that the teacher is ever more than an instrumental cause is to suppose that the activity of a teacher can itself suffice to cause learning to occur in another person, even though the latter remains entirely passive. I'm building up to something, by the way. I'm not just reading through excerpts. Okay, I'm just going to go here. Where's the line? I better have highlighted this line. I didn't. Hold on. Oh, here, yeah, it's in the first highlighted paragraph. Successful teaching only occurs when the mind of the learner passes from a state of ignorance or error to a state of knowledge. The knowledge acquired. Okay, hold on a second. Yeah, okay, I'll just read it. The knowledge acquired may be either something already known by the teacher or something about which he himself is inquiring, like all my shiur. In either case, the transformation effected in the mind of the learner is learning by instruction only if another human being has taken certain deliberate steps to bring about that transformation. Okay, so that I think is the key concept of teaching, is that all learning is by discovery, either aided or unaided, and what your role as a teacher is to facilitate the discovery on the part of the student through deliberate active steps. There's one more line here though that I hold on, let me just skim for it. Okay, it's a very good essay. You should read it. Was it? Yeah, you should read the whole thing. Yeah, but I think to me that if I had to like boil it down to one principle, it's that, which is that your role as a teacher is to facilitate discovery on the part of the student through deliberate steps. And in order to do that, you have to put yourself in the mind of the student and ask what do they need and how do they need it in order to take the next step, as opposed to all types of bad teaching are all predicated on various levels of ignorance or distortion or not caring about the mind of the student. Like he said, he has a whole indictment here about lecturing, like, or indoctrination. It's just like, the way that my teaching mentor, Rabbi Dr. Chaim Feuerman, put it is, he said, like, I don't know if you've heard this before, that there's two types of teachers: the sage on the stage or the guide on the side. And I'm a big proponent of the guide on the side. Like, obviously there's a place for a sage on the stage, but like, the real teaching occurs when you are guiding the student to their own discovery. And that's, okay, here's another, okay, I gotta read this. It's hard to just not read this entire essay, but so it's hard to just not read this whole essay. Okay. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that. I'm just reading this whole essay. So yeah, you gotta read the essay. Yeah. Yes.
Is it possible to get to a stage of not a vosh behaalosecha?
Right. So what Isaac is referencing is the Rambam, who's referencing Tehillim.
Yes.
Okay. I can learn I can use my new word. The Rambam's epigraph, which I used for my Darwin article this week, which is a quote that captures the theme of at the outset of a text that captures it. The theme is Az lo evosh b'habiti al kol mitzvosecha, from Tehillim 119:6. Then I will not be ashamed when I gaze upon all your mitzvos, or when I look at all your mitzvos. Plain shot is that the Rambam starts with this because this is the only book on all the mitzvos, right? And when you read the Mishnah Torah, you'll know all the mitzvos, and you won't be embarrassed. So the answer is yes. Learn the Mishnah Torah. Now, if you're asking, like, can you really understand infinite Chachmas Hashem? The answer is no. There's your answer. So like, depends on what the busha is, right? Like I think the busha he's referring to, where it is achievable, is like not knowing a halacha, and you can know all the halachos, in the sense of knowing what to do and what to keep. You could probably know all halachic literature, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about knowing what to do, right? The asur v'mutar v'chai v'pater, and you can know that. It doesn't mean that you're gonna, there's obviously still cases that come up that, but I don't think that's not what David Melech is talking about. He means like knowing the system well enough to be able to say, okay, this is what God's will is, and I can like, fulfill it as a matter of course. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
There was a Orthodox Conundrum podcast, like right before Pesach, about whether the existence time is like archaeologically, like, borne out, or
Yeah.
And I guess the question is generally if archaeological evidence is just absent, but like contraindicates what's written in the Torah. Like, how do you kind of?
So can you give an example of that, just so we're on the same page?
I mean, like I think he was saying, I don't have it clear in my memory, but like he was saying, like maybe like the dates don't line up, or like like the thing, in terms of to make sense that Yitzhak time was like a historical event.
Okay, so first of all, just to direct you to the shiur. Anyone remember what I call the shiur?
Just the guide. I think it's some guidelines to deal with.
Yeah, hold on, let me just look up.
Archaeological.
Yeah, Schneeweiss guidelines, archaeology, insights into. Nope, that's my article. Some guidelines for thinking about biblical historicity versus archaeology. Okay, so this is a two-part shiur. So I recommend going through that. I also recommend reading Rabbi Joshua Berman's book Ani Ma'amin, which is where I was just basically like summarizing a lot of this and presenting it. So like look there for more depth. What I was going to say though is that that with ancient archaeology, which is where most of the Torah's events are going to be there. There are so many not just unknowns, but like radical shifts where like they will discover a tomb of a pharaoh and shift the whole timeline because they just didn't know that this whole thing was there. So that's why I was asking, like, I think it's very hard to have like, contraindications from archaeology. The thing I could imagine is like, let's say, like, let's say like, okay, we know that Shlomo HaMelech took over after David HaMelech, right? Let's say like we find like a bajillion artifacts that say that like someone else took it over, like an Assyrian king took over, conquered David HaMelech stuff. And like we find like evidence of David HaMelech's monarchy, and then like that it was replaced by Assyria. And like there's no such thing as Malchus Shlomo at all. Positive, like that would be very difficult, you know. Then like I'd be hard. It's a good question, but I think a lot of these cases, like you have to go on a case to case basis. But a lot of these cases, like the knowledge is so scant and also so subject to change based on other things, like new discoveries, that like I just don't know about those cases, you know. So like I could talk hypothetically about a case, but you know I'm not sure. I think I looked at the particulars.
I was speaking with an archaeologist who said that she was very adamant archaeology is not science.
Right.
It's like it's just like not what it is.
Right. That's why in that other thing that came up in the search results, yeah, this is still the most popular article. The two truths and a bunch of lies, insights into biblical archaeology for conspiracy theorists. I'll take you behind the paywall. So this guy Hancock said, or is this behind the paywall? I don't know. It's more like a kind of philosophy. Oh, sorry. So Hancock says, I strongly resist the idea that archaeology is a science. I don't think it should be described as a science. Then Joe Rogan says, what do you think it should be classified as? And Hancock says, it's more like a kind of philosophy. It's an attempt to interpret the past based on rather flimsy and limited evidence. And what you find in that interpretation is that the preconceptions of the individuals involved are being imposed upon the evidence, which then turns out to support their preconceptions. And that's not a scientific way of doing things. A scientific way of doing things is testing hypotheses and seeking to falsify them and seeing if they work out. And then I go on to talk about how this guy is a conspiracy theorist and he does this all the time, you know, with his own stuff. So like, so I agree, Isaac, with the person you're quoting that, you know, and we're talking ancient archaeology, right? Like if you're studying like Britain in the 1800s, that is, you know, I don't know if I call it a science, but it's not like philosophizing about like artifacts like this is. Yeah, Michael.
So I understand like in a case where you use archaeology to like understand one of the Fukim or something like that. Like I understand using that to help your understanding of Torah. But if it's something where like based on archaeological evidence, it's hard to maintain that 600,000 Jewish males left Mitzrayim.
Right.
Should you allow that to change your understanding of that, or like maybe that Malchus Shlomo couldn't have been as that?
Yeah. So you know, we have no example greater than the Rambam, who says in the Moreh Nevuchim that if we found, we have the classic rainbow of the Ramban, right? Where the Ramban, I'm not going to read through it inside right now, but like where he says that, you know, you would think that the rainbow existed only from the time of Noah, but the Greek, the Chachmei Yavan have shown that rainbows are natural, so we have to reinterpret the Pesukim on that basis. And then the greatest example of that is the Rambam, who says if we had incontrovertible proof that the universe was eternal, we would have to reinterpret Bereshis. You know, so I think the same. So if that's true for science and for Ikari HaEmuna, I mean, Rambam holds that Kadmus HaOlam goes against goes against one of the Ikarim. You know, like then Kolshkein for archaeology. Like, yeah, if you had actual, compelling argument to say that there couldn't have been this number of Jews in in Yeshiva Mitzrayim, which there are, obviously, Berman thinks that, right? So then, yeah, you're gonna have to, reinterpret things, and then the only question is like, what's the tipping point, Yeah.
I mean, I feel like a lot of discussion on archaeology, like we're saying, is it's not a science. So
right.
Would you maybe try to say like, unless there's like actual, like somehow unless you had actual proof that this was the number of Jews that left Mitzrayim,
right?
Would you maybe say that you need something as clear as that?
I mean, I think it's a matter of intuition. Like let's say in my my shiur about the Mabul, right? Mabul, Schneeweiss, global flood.
Mabul versus science.
Mabul versus science. Thank you. Mabul versus science. I don't come up in the Google results. Okay, fine. All right, we got to talk to YouTube. What?
Flood versus science.
Flood versus science.
Just gonna be...
This other article I wrote came up.
Well, if you're on YouTube.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Flood, Mabul versus science. Yeah. Right. So that's where you should go for this. So there I make the argument that it is irrational, totally irrational for a person now to think that the Mabul was global. Okay, and the fact that that the vast majority of the vast majority of Mefarshim do think that is because they did not know about geology, they didn't know about zoology like that we have, they didn't know about ecosystems. So it's absolutely impossible. And I think you have to read the Psukim. Now, that doesn't go against any Ikarim or whatever, and it does go against all the Mefarshim, but so for me, I'm at that point by the Mabul. For Berman, he's at that point about the number of Klal Yisrael in Mitzrayim. Now I think a lot of people who do answer the Mitzrayim question, like someone was just asking, I think this is also an argument that they have, that in the census, the number of firstborns is like, anyone know the number of firstborns in the
It has a problem. That like causes the problem.
yeah, right. It's like 22,000 or something like that, or some like very small number.
It's close to 22,000. That's the number of Leviim, and it was slightly more than that.
Yeah, right. So like, if you think about it, 22,000 firstborn males in in a population of millions, like that must mean that there's like. Say again? Yeah, right. So so like these questions depend on how you weigh those things, and like to what extent do you find the numbers and science more compelling? To what extent do you have allegiance to the psukim? How much are you like? I think these are like weighing intuition questions. Yeah. Okay. I think that's it for today. That was a good Q&A. Glad we got to have this extra last Q&A. And I guess this is the last official shiur of the season for me. So good year.